message Anna and I on Zoom, and we'll be able to edit you out later. So, but yeah, we are recording this.
Great. I've got, there's quite a few people coming in, so if you see me reaching forward, that's me letting people in. It's, well, again, thanks to everybody. I'll be referring to some of my notes. I'm going to introduce you to Shefik Bey, and I'll get him to sort of give a bit of a background, or his background. But the run sheet today is really just an overview of Shefik, what Shefik's working on now, and really to focus, I guess, framing up that problem space that we're in right now. So this is the persona, the customer journey, problem statement, and some research elements that starts to bind that together. Thank you to all the teams that sent through the questions. I've given them across to Shefik. I'll sort of curate those and I'll work through those once Shefik's gone through his bit. And then, we'll summarise with any key takeaways and summaries, but without any further ado, we'll try and keep it to that 1 hour maximum. And I'll pass it over to Shefik for a bit of an overview and also what he's working on now, some of the cool stuff that he's working on.
Thanks, Adam, and hi everyone. Nice to meet you all virtually. As a way of introduction, so I currently run a consulting business by the name of Lido Island, and our role is really to assist, probably mainly for purpose businesses and startups, with I guess a number of different areas, but really revolving around innovation, strategy, and execution, essentially. So the work I've been working on sort of most recently has been across a range of sectors, whether that's government, different charities and for-purpose businesses, social impact businesses, and a range of startups. So it's a couple, and I guess I can go into a little bit more detail with some of those case studies in terms of the types of work that I'm working on as this sort of unfolds. And I've seen some of your questions as well, and there's some really great and poignant questions around better understanding the problem space. And hopefully I can give you a few insights and tips and tricks to maybe use and leverage in the future. Also, as a way of background, Adam, I guess, has introduced me to this program because we've done some work together in the past around research. So my background has been sort of in that sort of analytics and research space originally. So I, in the sort of late 90s and early 2000s, set up a business called Red Sheriff, which was a global audience measurement platform, which was essentially the basis of what Google Analytics became into the later 2000s. And sort of after that, I established a user experience consultancy business called the U1 Group. Also developed a global platform called Loop 11, which was really around providing online, unmoderated user testing and really focused on the North American market. And then since exiting both the U1 Group and Loop 11, I've been focusing mainly on consulting. So that's probably a little bit of a background in terms of me. What kind of makes me tick and what really interests me is very much around innovative and transformative innovation. So how can we sort of improve the human experience? And that is largely why I've focused on government for purpose businesses and startups. And certainly what my role is to try and help and support great people doing great work. So that's probably a little bit of a nutshell of what I've been up to. Adam, do you want me to get into some more case studies in terms of some of those recent clients? I think you might be on mute there, Adam.
Yeah, unmute, there you go. How's that? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so I think what's great, and just to sort of give context also for the team, what Shefik also has done in this problem space, particularly around focus groups, user interaction, both at that primary level. I think we did a lot of work with Think Group around 2008-9, where we actually had teams of people come in and we watched their behaviours online. And so I think Shefik really within that space is, I guess, where we're fielding a lot of uncertainty, students doing it for the first time, unsure about what the next steps are, trepidation, fear of making mistakes, all that sort of stuff. So, if you want to share some sort of case studies, particularly in the area, some things that you've seen, particularly in the problem domain, where teams have worked really well together, and what were some of the key things there, and also some examples of where it didn't work so well, so the teams can look at, if they're going down that path, they can see potentially some signs where they might navigate away from.
Yep, sure, definitely. So I guess that the first point is, if we're thinking about transformative innovation or any form of innovation, we're looking to bring about change. So often what happens is, and this is from my experience, is that most often people and organisations try to bring about change thinking they're bringing about a technical change. So, but what actually they're doing is transformative innovation really requires adaptive change, and there's a significant difference. It might be worth as an entree to just talk a little bit about what that is and what the differences are. If you know a little bit about this space, excuse me for covering old territory, but I think it's important for those that don't. So again, a technical challenge or a technical change might be something such as developing an app such as Tram Tracker. So what that is that punters or commuters need to know when the tram is about to arrive. It's a fairly simple problem state. When does the tram arrive at this tram stop? When does the next tram come? And there's a technical solution for that. So it can be solved pretty rapidly and quickly and then executed. So with an innovation such as that, it really it requires a bit of informative learning, but it can actually be solved quite rapidly in a shorter span of time. We'd all love to have great innovations that solve a technical challenge because they're so easy to implement. And Adam, when you said before that it can be a little bit overwhelming, partly that is that there's very few innovations that we will probably work on that just solve technical challenges. Most of them are really about adaptive challenges, and these tend to be a lot harder to define. The other area about adaptive challenges is that they really require sort of longer term exploration and outcomes. So what often happens is that you might sort of pull a couple of levers to say, if I do X, I might get Y. You might actually get Y, but you might also get A, B, C, D, E, F, G at the same time, and which you didn't expect in the first instance. It also requires a lot of collaboration. So it's not a one-person job, and often it doesn't suit the type of individual that wants to sort of lock themselves away in a room, come up with an awesome idea and then take it to market. So that's another really important thing. A lot of what I come across both with clients and out in the marketplace as well is that people can be really protective around their IP and say, look, I can't tell anyone about this. I've got to sort of keep it under wraps. But what actually happens is that they lock down the ability to go externally and source a whole range of different divergent thoughts and ideas that they can bring into the mix. So there are a couple of things. So I'd like you just to kind of bear in mind the adaptive challenges when we're looking at the problem space, because often we get overwhelmed when we see that we don't have to just solve one problem. We're actually solving a multitude of problems with what we're trying to innovate. So look, in terms of some interesting case studies, it might be worth taking you through a couple. So I worked with an organisation, a startup by the name of Kookaburra. If you want to check out Kookaburra, they're up and out in the marketplace currently. And they approached me about 12 months ago because they'd come up with a concept which was really tapping into a growing market. And that growing market was home-based cooks. So in my demographic, I've got young children, I work full time, I'm a little bit time poor, I struggle to cook every night. I'm not really in a position where I want to do Uber Eats every night of the week. And what these home-based cooks have sort of sprung out of the ground in all sorts of different suburbs is they're servicing that market where maybe it's families who want to have a good, wholesome home-baked or home-cooked meal. that's delivered to their door, picked up from a school, and essentially Kookaburra was trying to support those home-based cooks who really had very little idea or understanding of accounting, don't really know what their profit margins are on the meals that they're preparing, and so on and so forth. So what we did with them is ran a Google Ventures style 5-day design sprint, where we were able to go through a whole range of exercises, which really sort of tapped into the design thinking paradigm of convergent, divergent thinking through to prototyping and testing all over the course of 5 days. So with that particular product, they went into beta mode, set it up with a couple of cooks, was going quite well as they're approaching a funding round. And then, we know what's happened over the last month or two with COVID-19, an enormous, a huge opportunity to try and support these restaurants and delis and other food supply businesses that kind of have to rapidly approach takeaway and move away from in on-premise dining. So they're experiencing huge growth, which is beautiful timing. It's all kind of luck in that context, but the process in which that they went through evaluating what the problem space was, who the target audience was, how they could go about actually servicing that need and delivering on it has been a really good success story. So that's one you can certainly check out. Another bit of work that I've been heavily involved with is with a government agency called Service Victoria. And Service Victoria, their role is almost like the MyGov of Victorian government, really focusing on making transacting with government pain-free and easier. And I'm sure a number of you have transacted with governments in a whole raft of different ways, whether that's renewing your car registration, maybe getting a fishing license, or working with Children Check, or whatever that might be. What Service Victoria are aiming to do is turn the government paradigm on its head and be more customer focused and human centered in the way that it develops its services. So that's been a really interesting one because it's really required a hell of a lot of adaptive change from the government side. And what Service Victoria does is it sits in between the agency. So in the case of, say, working with Children Check, it's Department of Justice, and the customer, which is the people that are actually looking to get a working with Children Check. And so an inordinate number of challenges exist in that space because Service Victoria kind of has to bow to a number of gods. So firstly, customer experience being number one, we have to make the process as pain-free as possible. And part of that was trying to provide digital online digital identity verification. So rather than moving off to an Australia Post outlet to get an operator to evaluate that, yes, this is Sheffiq Bey and I've seen his identification, and yes, that's the right person that's due to get the Working with Children check, that happens online. And some of the challenges that we've had with both that and the Solar Homes rebate scheme, which some of you may have been aware of as well, is that there's some technical limitations and not everyone can get through a digital identity verification process. So there's been a whole lot of work and challenge around understanding the problem space, really working with the disparate stakeholders that often work at cross purposes to try and develop an outcome that is pain-free for customers. So some really, really interesting learnings there. I think if I'm to be fair with the government, often the government try to approach innovation as a technical challenge or technical change, when in fact it's nothing to do with that at all. It's about taking a whole range of stakeholders on a journey. So the tech actually doesn't matter. And to some degree, I'd say that ideas are cheap. From an innovation standpoint, ideas are cheap. And I myself don't hold my own ideas too close to my chest because I really want to get them out there, get people to talk to me and conduct my own research and actually tear it apart remove that affirmation bias that I might have that I've got a winning idea here, and just pull it apart. So sometimes that leads you down to a position where you have to exit and pull out of a different idea or concept because you verified that you're not really solving the problem. Or indeed, because it's an adaptive change that you're bringing about, that the stakeholders are really, really hard to work with, and that you don't think that you can deliver the outcomes that you'd intended to in the first place. So there are a couple of examples of things that have worked well and not so well. And I think the other thing to know is that this process never finishes. So we have the perspective when we start out on a journey, when we've got a great idea or the light bulb switches on, that we're going to take this to market and we're going to absolutely smash it. But innovation is incremental. And if you look at really successful businesses, where they start out and where they launch versus where they end up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years later, is in a very, very different position. So we can never really stop evolving and looking at continually innovating what we're doing. And so I guess on that note, it's probably worthwhile talking about some of the tools, practices and processes that certainly I use and I advocate in this journey. So, and I know that Adam in a previous discussion has mentioned he's sort of walked you through a little bit of the human-centered design thinking, service design concepts. And there's certainly aspects that I look to include in each project that I work on. What's really important, I think, at the get-go when we're looking at understanding that we've got a great idea that we're looking to evolve, is that we need to take that balcony view on that problem state. So again, Adam has talked to you probably a little bit before about Clayton Christensen, what is the job to be done? So how do we get ourselves in a position that we can objectively take that balcony view and not just affirm what a great idea we've got, because that's useless. We need to really understand, well, how will this solve the inherent problem that's out in the marketplace? And so how do you actually start on that journey? And Adam was saying that it can be a little bit overwhelming, and I have built numerous platforms and launched and sold businesses, and I still find the process overwhelming at times. So you're not alone. What I fall back to is really those sanity checks, sort of opening up to the devil's advocates and making sure that I'm conducting research, that I'm going out and exploring the problem space. And often I saw a question that came through in some of the questions that Adam had sent through earlier to say, which do we do first? Do we start with qualitative research or quantitative research? And I guess the first step is to kind of see what existing research is currently presented out there that might reflect the problem that we're dealing with. So do a bit of desk research. But then once we've done that bit of digging, it's really about delving into some qualitative research first. So what I often do is look at engaging mobile ethnography studies. So there's some great online platforms to recruit audiences and actually execute studies. And the purpose of those is really to get into the mindset of what your potential customers are doing from a broader perspective. So if it's a case of, for example, I talked about the Working with Children check earlier, what we actually did is followed the end-to-end customer journey of people that were wanting to get a Working with Children check. So right from the spark, what was the element that told them, oh, I really do need a Working with Children check, I better check that out? How did they go through the process of exploring what's involved? How did they end up, did they consult friends, families, sporting clubs? What were some of the issues and challenges that they experienced along that road? And through mobile ethnography, we were able to get them to capture some qualitative video insights of every aspect of the journey. So them filling out the forms to going off to an Australia Post outlet, we got them to take photographs of the outlet that they were in, How long were the queues? Were they waiting long? What was the service like from the staff member? How closely did they check your identification? So on and so forth. And so with that type of research in mind, we were able to formulate a customer journey map. So an end-to-end customer journey map where we're able to track each step along the journey and the various touch points. And I guess what's really important about journey mapping is that we capture pretty much all the major touch points, whether they are influenced by the potential idea or solution that we might have, or they are touch points that exist beyond our realm of control or influence or desire to influence. Because we need to understand the overarching customer experience. And it's often within areas that we least expect that we can innovate. So, you know, what we actually found with the Working with Children check is that actually going to the Australia Post outlet was probably not the biggest point of friction. Some of the biggest points of friction around identification. So what forms of ID do I have? Can I use to get a Working with Children check? And we really need to help solve that problem. Although we were able to offer the online identity verification, it was really important that we were able to not solve the problem, but assist people on that journey to say, well, these are the valid forms of ID that you can use to get your Working with Children check. And here's how you can go about getting those in place to get this check in place too. So that's really about the customer journey map. And also, I mentioned...
Just a question, sorry, I've got a question from the group.
Sure.
And you mentioned one of the challenges the groups have been having is, okay, they're exploring this problem domain. I think the groups have got some skill sets to go and get that quantitative research, market size, the demographics of a market, sort of breaking it down to get into the persona, if you like, or into the mindset of the individual from a quantitative point of view. But you mentioned like a qualitative tool. What would be a tool that you could point the groups at that might help them frame up, whether it's surveying or engagement or access to potential people that they might be able to engage with? Because one of the key principles that we're really driving home here, and you've mentioned it here, is yes, we might have an idea. Let's not overvalue the idea and let's not be precious about it. And there's a guy we've both worked with, John Klein, Sheffield. And John Klein used to say, you know, you keep secrets from the market and the market will keep secrets from you. And what he's really saying there is if you hold things too tight, you won't be able to get that feedback to iterate and improve and innovate, really. So one of the things we're really aiming for the students to do is to get active very quickly, and as dirty and ugly as it may be, actually put something out there, prototype, get that feedback, reshape, and it could reform any part of that design thinking process, right? As you're saying, it's not a linear process, really. So what are some of those tools, Sheffield, that you think some of the tools that the students may feel that or may be beneficial to the students?
Yeah. Look, a couple of tools that I've used recently for mobile ethnography. There's a tool called Indemo, INDEEMO. It's a tool that's based out of Ireland, of all places. But there's a couple of others that you can use. I don't advocate just using Indemo, but if you look to explore, that's one I've used recently, and that worked really, really well. I thought the platform was quite easy to set up. One of the key aspects for this is, and what puts a lot of people off doing their own research, is a hesitancy to actually get in front of people and conduct that research. And, you know, the research can be as simple as guerrilla research, where you go down to Southern Cross Station and with a bar of chocolate in your hand saying, hey, have you got a couple of minutes for a bar of chocolate? I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. Now, that's a really, really quick and easy, dirty way to get some feedback.
Yep.
Maybe not particularly targeted, but it's really cheap. So if you're going to use a tool like Indemo, there's a price tag attached, and it might be, you know, $1,000 or a couple of $1,000 to leverage it for a study. So that's why I mentioned there's not just one tool. There's a suite of things and a bucket of things that you might call upon depending on what sort of budget you've got available to yourself. The other is, how do I get to interview or get in front of the right people? And panel-based research is a really effective way to do that. I use another tool called Askable, Askable. And Askable is essentially a participant recruitment tool where you can set up a range of filters. And for example, with the Working with Children check, I was able to say, look, I want Victorians because it's only Victoria that I'm interested in. I'll ask questions to say, which of the following, if any, are you expecting activities were you expecting to do in the next 3 months? And there was volunteering being one. And if they said, yep, volunteering is one, I'd say, well, what type of volunteering? Would you be looking to help the impoverished? Is it environmental? Is it with children or sporting clubs and so on? So I can use those as a way to filter down to get the right people that I'm looking for. So Adam, you talked about personas before. We can filter down to a persona level or a segment level. But again, a tool such as Askable is really helpful for that. Again, there's a price tag attached to that. If you can't afford an Askable, go out to run some Facebook ads, do some Google AdWords, and try and get people to answer responses such as those. There's cheaper panels such as Mechanical Turk being another one. With some of these cheaper exercises, the participants haven't been vetted, they haven't gone through the process, they might kind of not know a lot about what's expected of them. So you might have to do a little bit more of the heavy lifting, and you might have to go out to get a larger sample size to throw a number of them away because they weren't quite what you expected them to be. So there are a couple of tools for qualitative research. As I said, guerrilla research, just approaching people in the streets, another way. It's cheap, it's quick, you get feedback straight away. What I would steer you clear of is conducting research with people that you know and people that know you, because they're going to affirm the ideas that you have and go, wow, Adam, that's an awesome idea.
Yeah, right.
Such a smart guy. You don't want to be doing that. You want to be getting people to tear your ideas apart. And only through that will you learn and adapt and change. And so what's important with these earlier sort of rounds of research, it tends to be qualitative because you're not quite settling on an idea. You might be in the throngs of an interview and that you might find out that there's a different problem out there that is really worth solving. So an example also is I do, as Adam has said, I've run thousands of focus groups in my time. I ran a focus group out west, which was really around trying to say, well, how can we solve obesity in regional Victoria? Because obesity in regional Victoria is becoming a huge problem state. And running some focus groups with stakeholders and consumers out west, what became really apparent is that we were trying to solve the wrong problem. The problem's not around obesity. The problem's a much, much greater issue around self-esteem, employment,
right.
Access, being remote, not being able to walk to the shops. And essentially we discovered that we were going down the wrong path. And we're just trying to tackle obesity. We're really attacking a symptom, not a cause. Right. Yeah. So again, if we hadn't conducted that research, we would have just that, yep, we're on a great move here. We had the organisations that we're working with had, $1 million in government funding to do some amazing work. But ultimately, I'm not interested in taking money and delivering crap outcomes. I'm really about problem solving. So we really had to reshuffle and change our focus on that one.
That's so useful, Shefik, in terms of one of the challenges the students have had is how do they frame that up. I've got an action here. I'll reach out to some of these to see if we can get some student licenses, and then students, depending on the project that they're working on, might be able to tap into some of these tools. The idea really is, Chef, is that we want to make sure that there is a toolkit that we need to innovate You know, it's like a carpenter. A carpenter can't build a home without maybe a nail gun these days, or a hammer and a nail back when we were younger, and all that sort of stuff. And so there is a set of tools that I think if the students can take with them beyond the course, or at least then they understand there's certain concepts. But the major theme, which is great to hear, because it is something we're weaving in, is that engagement in some form with the end customer that is an arm's length to get that feedback. And that is quite okay. That it's quite okay to bring that information back, so that you might reshape any part of that persona, journey, problem statement. All that's up for grabs at any way, shape through the process, isn't it? It's always up for grabs.
Always. It never stops too. So you never get to a finished state. And that's something that's really important to know, that we set out on a journey and we go, wow, when we get here, we're going to be nailing it. And it's all happy days. But it continues on. I guess the other thing too, Adam, in terms of overwhelm, as far as understanding the problem state, I was asked to kind of be involved in developing the Human-Centered Design Handbook for Victorian Government. And it was an awesome exercise to be involved with, because I got to collaborate with some fantastic, really, really smart people. I then got the handbook back, and it was an absolute encyclopedia of research tools and techniques and so on and so forth. And I went, oh my God, that's not helpful, because you actually don't need to know 501 different tools and services. You're never going to be good at them. And it's just overkill. So in my book, there's probably a handful that I use on a regular basis, throughout the product life cycle. So, and maybe I'll sort of quickly run through. So if I'm starting out, desk research is always my first stop. So who else is out there? Who's tackling this problem? Who's doing what? That's a first step. Then I start to socialize those thoughts and ideas and outcomes with other people. Again, not holding them close to my chest, but actually talking. And then quite often a number of them hit the cutting room floor, because, there's someone else that's nailed that already. And I check it out and I'm like, oh, yes, they have too. What then happens is that, yes, if I've passed those sort of initial kind of tests, and I've got a network of other entrepreneurs that I call up and we bounce ideas off on a regular basis. So if it passes that test and they say that sounds like a great concept, I then sort of head off to that qualitative research stage, where I'll do some mobile ethnography. I might facilitate a couple of interviews, and in terms of a couple, it might be something like 6 to 8 interviews, and I'll run them progressively. So I might change for 2 or 3 and start to interview different people, or change my line of questioning. I've talked about mobile ethnography. Sometimes I'll run focus groups if I need to. More collaborative.
Sheffield, sorry just to jump in. Do you just want to explain a little bit about mobile ethnography and what it means and why it's useful in this particular stage of the process?
Yeah, so mobile ethnography is purely a tool to be almost like a fly on the wall, observing what people are doing. So you set the context. So the context, as I said before, might have been, I want to shadow someone going through the end-to-end process of applying for a Working with Children check. And so what they do with a product like Endemo, which is all kind of mobile based, is that they'll have an app on their phone. I'll set a number of questions saying, hey, you've had this thought and idea, I've recruited people that genuinely, let's say, for example, they're going to volunteer with a local sporting club that, their child or nephew or niece or something might be a part of. I've recruited them, that they're interested in getting a Working with Children check, and then I shadow them through the process of observing how they approach that. And they will record video of themselves. I'll get them to tell us a little bit about themselves. Why do they want to Working with Children check? How will they approach it? They go through the online application. They tell us about it. What worked? What didn't work? What did you like? What didn't you like? What was the best part? What was the worst part?
Yep.
Then they go to AusPost Outlet. Show us a picture of how you get there. I rode my bike. Here's a picture of my bike. Here's the car. Here's the queues at the office. Geez, it was crowded today. Or gosh, it was really simple and straightforward, and the attendant was super polite. So I want to capture all of that. So that's really what mobile ethnography provides. And interestingly enough, that was a really interesting one for Service Victoria, because there was a myth internally, I'd have to say, that people hated going to Australia Post to verify their identity.
Yeah.
The reality was that people were scoring it really high. The staff were really friendly. The queues were pretty short. Not everyone wants to go during business hours to verify their identity. And certainly what we worked out is we have to provide them both options. Do it online or go to AusPost. So we got that through the mobile ethnography.
Yep.
Does that provide a bit more insight?
No, that's great, Shefik. And I think the concept of shadowing is a really important one. And I'll share another story with the group just last year when we launched into the a 3D, internal 3D location tool in at UCSD Rady School last year. Working with a number of guys from Qualcomm, really strong engineering background, they wanted to basically have a step-through guide on how people paired the app on the phone with this device. And I made it really clear that I didn't want that to happen, because we had to get 40,000 of these devices out to students, and we couldn't be the good shepherd and get them there. So it was actually really interesting sitting and sitting alongside a number of we had 30 staff and a part of this pilot group. And it was interesting just sitting next to them as they tried to pair the device and where they looked for certain actions. And it was the learnings. We ended up documenting about 50 key learnings, not only in this initial handout session, but as we ran a 2-hour window for the staff, faculty and students to trigger off devices and chatting with the mock response teams, the amount of learnings that we got that were just not even on our radar, because we didn't guide or shepherd, because once the product's out there, there's no one to do that, right? So the importance of actually getting something in somebody's hands and watching them use it or engage with it without sort of someone saying, well, no, that's not how you use it. It's more like, oh, why did you use it that way? That is still heavy in that question and discovery phase to start to validate that journey, and whether you discover more problems, and maybe the problems are even more wicked than what you started with. Like your obesity example, you start down one journey, you're getting this information back, and actually, hang on a minute, this is more insidious than we initially thought. So that's why I wanted to hone in on that, not just around the mobile piece. This is for any product. The principles are still the same, aren't they?
Oh, completely. And I think you raise a really interesting point too around what sort of jogged my thinking as well, the challenge that we have structuring independence into our own research. So it may be that you're just not in a position to employ independently conduct this research for you. You have to do it yourself. And I do a lot of my own research, but what I try to do is leverage tools that provide that kind of step away. So mobile ethnography is one of those where you can set tasks, but you're not inadvertently helping them along the journey. So your role is not to make them more successful than they otherwise would be if you're not present. And I had some interesting exercises where we'd run user testing and focus groups over the years, and we had one-way mirrors, and this was quite some time ago. And we'd have the client banging on the mirror saying, "You idiot, it's just over there. You just have to press that button." But the fact is that they're not idiots, right? Because if they don't get it, chances are there's a lot of other people out there that don't get it either. So we want to capture that. We want to understand what their real activities and actions and processes are so that we can solve for that.
So Shefik, what I might do is I'm just going to quickly scan through some of these questions. Some of them I might just say that, hey, I think we may have covered that. There's also been some questions from the floor. And what we'll do, guys, we will cut it at 5 o'clock sharp. But what we'll do, if Shefik's okay with this, I'll package up these questions. And Shefik, I might grab you and we might just pen a couple of responses back to the team. And particularly whether it's URLs, tools, some ideas and some guidance. I have reached out to a number of groups that I'll do some short little one-on-ones with them to sort of get them moving, get them sort of pushed into contradicting what we're saying. I will give them a little nudge and guidance, being the shepherd into some of the areas. But one of the questions was, about competition. So when selecting a problem to solve in a problem domain, how do you go about effectively analysing the potential market, considering the existing competitors in that market, or do you find that actually helps in some regard?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, I always, as my first cab off the rank, is to carry out some desk research. So what is the idea that I have? What's the spark? And who else, just carrying out some Google searches to understand who's trying to solve that currently.
Yeah.
And sometimes it might actually throw you off and go, oh, there's someone out there doing a really good job of that. But just by the fact of their existence doesn't mean they're nailing it or actually meeting that need. So I think what's, and as I said earlier, ideas are cheap. It's really around how you execute. So it might be enough for you then to go out and say, look, I might want to do some comparative research on the competition. I might want to do some user testing and actually get people to use their product or service, do some mystery shopping. That's another thing you can do, where you call them up and say, hey, I'm really interested in your services. Tell me about that. How does it work? What do you cost? So that's another thing to do. But what you often will find is that they've got a certain bent or an angle that they're trying to solve. And more often than not, if you guys are doing your research appropriately, you'll be better informed than they will anyway. So, most organizations out there are not doing enough research. They're not being agile enough. They're not looking at iterative innovation. So you can just be more nimble. You can be smarter. You can be faster by nature of the fact that you better understand the problem state.
Right.
So it comes back a lot to the, what is the job to be done, evaluating through your research to say, how's the competition satisfying the customer? Are they solving this problem? Yes or no? And on the basis of your findings, you might say, look, I think this is done. It's already been solved. I don't see a role for us in this game. Off we go. I guess another thing I will say is that I'm a big advocate of niching a product early. So rather than going for mass markets, I might want to target to a distinct problem. So that might be targeting a certain demographic. You might call it a persona. It might be a certain problem state of which there is competition out there at a broader level, but no one's meeting that problem state for this particular target audience.
No, I agree. I agree with that, Sheffield. It's something that we raised in the workshop last week, was sort of, as you start in this, you sort of start with this big, broad vision to start with. As you start shaking things down, when you're really hitting that traction, hitting that market hard, really, and particularly for the students, try and make sure that that problem statement that is so tight. I'm quite happy for them to be very, very, razor sharp. Not that worried about the size of any addressable market in this particular exercise. It's more, can they really get a prototype to market and engage, get a solution, iterate and demonstrate that through the journey. And I think it's something that I will share through to the students. And I didn't do it, and I should have. And that was this, what is the job to be done? Which is a classic Clayton Christian comment that I think the students will get a lot out of. And that is, what activities do you need to be doing?
Yeah. And it's certainly to that end, Adam, you've got to get it out there as quickly as you can to get some feedback. So often the other mistake we see is that, really polished prototype getting to market. Look, just some hand sketches is often enough. So as I talked about, I've leveraged the Google Ventures Sprint process. So there's a book out there called Sprint by Jake Knapp. I've interviewed Jake. He's a really great guy. There's a podcast, I produced a podcast called True North, which you'll find on iTunes, where I interview, I don't personally interview, but one of my colleagues, Ben, interviews Jake. And there's some really good insights around how you can leverage the Google Ventures design sprint methodology to rapidly evolve and prototype and test a solution in market in 5 days. And the whole view there is that don't spend forever ideating, polishing, get it out there, get some feedback, pivot, do whatever you need to do to take that next step to get a great product to market.
Got another question here from the group. Well, we've discussed, do you recommend collaborating with external teams to explore the problem? The answer is yes. We've talked about that, I think, at length. How do you know when you have enough insights to move forward with the process? Again, I think we've talked about that as one is I don't think you'll ever have enough insights. I think you've got more than enough to go now. And the whole idea is putting it back out there is you're going to constantly get insights because it is a loop of learning. It is a double loop learning process. So I think to answer that question is you've got enough to move, to build a prototype, to give it to a persona, to get that feedback, to iterate and go again. And then that's enough insights to go again. I think that's what we've talked about.
It's really around what we've said, Adam, is those regular feedback loops is really important.
Yes.
Get it out there early, get the feedback, iterate, feedback.
Yeah.
And it's not a one-stop shop. It's just a multiple rounds.
And what we're trying to infuse into the teams is that, I've said that it would be great if the teams can meet every day for 20 minutes. Now, we know that that's not feasible when you've got some group members are working, some are full-time students, they've got different courses, etc. But even something like Slack, checking in once a day for 5 minutes, on Slack to say at 9 o'clock every morning, hey, everyone we're going okay. Yep, I've got this task I need to do today. I'm going to interview those 3 clients. So-and-so's closing out the next phase of iteration of the prototype. Someone else's work. So it's basically every day we're doing something. We've got a job to do, getting in more and more information so that by the end of the week, there might have been dozens of iterations in different forms, in different parts of the process. I think that's it. We've talked about sources of information. So we've talked about, desktop research, reaching out to groups like Askable, Mechanical Turk, which we can share with the teams. There's the question around, is qualitative or quantitative data more important in defining the problem? I think what you've said, Chef, if I can echo that back, they're both important at different stages of the process. That quantitative data will get you going, frames things up a little bit, but then you're going to push that out into that action piece with the customer base, the users, and that's where you're going to get that qualitative information from them as well. So is that a fair?
It's actually the other way around. So I think you start to understand the problem state with qualitative feedback and insights. Yep. And then what that enables you to do is be quite agile and move that in different directions depending on what you're discovering progressively. The problem is if you look at quantitative research, you structure a questionnaire, you put it out there, you can't change it on the fly. And often, even now I'll put questionnaires, quantitative questionnaires out there, and most times I'll go, oh my God, I wish if I could change that last bit, even though I've checked it 10 times. I can't do that with quant. But what quant does is once you've understood what the potential problem is, you can then validate how that affects different audiences. So is it across the board? Is it that, a certain demographics or personas, more or less likely to have this problem? And other things like pricing analysis to understand how do I price this product. We use a lot of quantitative research. So quant comes after qual.
Yep. And I probably misworded that. It was more like the desktop research to grab some of that initial information in. But you're right. It needs to. I've got another question here. What would you say is the most important hang on. Okay. What are the most important things to do while creating a journey map and the problem statement? What are some of the key things that the students need to be addressing or should be aware of?
Yeah, look, it's tempting when you're creating a journey map to think about your solution and how your solution is going to bump the needle. That's not the purpose of a journey map. The purpose of a journey map is to understand the problem state and also to make sure you're getting that broader, bigger picture. So it's not just your touch points with the customer, it's what's the overarching customer journey out there that you're looking to play in. So that's really, really critical. You're capturing all of the major touch points, whether they're with you or without you being in the picture. And why I say that is that often innovation comes, and you've talked about a couple of examples yourself, Adam, where in the most unlikely of places. So, I created a product called Loop 11, which is an unmoderated online user testing tool simply to provide more quantitative research and findings around sort of app and website user testing and so on. But that was a problem that we're solving. But when you're thinking about executing research, and this is what I see now, and I've exited that business, but is that I actually think one of the bigger problems is how do I get the right people to look at this product? And that's where the Askables and some others come into the mix. So if I'd still had that product, I would have morphed and pivoted into looking at the broader problem state, because
Right.
often, you know, people can't join the dots. They don't know, well, I've got this tool to test, but who do I test with? And,
Yep.
and
Yep.
you know, one of the biggest hurdles to using Loop 11 is getting in front of the right people. So that's another
Right.
example.
Yep. With the current environment, we've had another question come through, Sheffic, which was around, obviously we can't go down to Southern Cross Station with the chocolate bar at the moment. But, we might get into a bit, it might cost them $1,600 just which, and we've all been students, that $1,600 is best spent on other things. But how would you go about it in an online environment now that we've got some restrictions there, but maybe there's some opportunities potentially, you know?
Yeah, great questions. And you're spot on. They're not ones that you can use today. So I am helping Service Victoria with a range of different transactional research pieces at the moment. One is with Disability Workers Registration Scheme, which is about to come into place. Now, with that too, we can't interview people in person. And to all intensive purposes, if we get people to come into Service Victoria's office in Footscray, we're kind of setting ourselves up for them to affirm that we're doing a great job. We look like a professional outfit. We don't look typically government. It's a little bit more tech startup. That alone could potentially influence how they react and respond to what we put in front of them. So what we're doing now is I'm leveraging the likes of Askable. So to go and find people, and I'm actually recruiting them for remote moderated interviews and sessions. So what that is that they're actually conducting an interview with me as you are now on Zoom. So you could use Zoom as
right.
And the other thing too is that if you're looking to save $1 because you don't have the money to leverage an Askable, I use another product called lookback.io, which is a research facilitation tool, so I can beam that off into remote offices for other stakeholders. I could have used Zoom. I could have used the free consumer version of Zoom, provided it was under 40 minutes. You could also, as I said, recruit people online through cheaper mechanisms like Mechanical Turk, or be just some good AdWords campaigns out there. You have to be a bit tenacious. As I say, if you're going through some of those other mechanisms, you're going to have to do a little bit more of the heavy lifting, and you might have to throw a few away to get the cost that you're after.
Yeah. No, that's great, Sheffy. Look, I'm just mindful we've got 5 minutes to go. We do have some other questions, which I've made a heap of notes here, and I've got some actions. I'll reach out to some of these tools to see if we can get some student licenses, and that I think will help the students as well. I think I saw David drop into the session. I'm not sure if David's actually still there, but I just wanted to open up to David and see if David.
Adam.
Sorry,
yeah,
Hannah?
he's here.
Hi, Adam. Hi, Sheffic. How you doing?
Sorry, David, could you repeat that?
I'll just make sure I'm unmuted. Just saying hello. Hi, Sheffic. How you doing?
I'm great, thanks, David. How are you?
Thanks very much for coming along to give your wisdom to our wonderful students. I've just caught the last 30, 40 minutes, and there's some great pointers there, particularly in the current environment. So thank you very much. And I'm sure they've taken a great deal from this.
My pleasure.
No, it's great. No, Sheffic, it's great. I think certainly the issues has been, one of the key issues has been how the student's going to reach out to their personas, because we have made such a big deal about this customer engagement to get that feedback loop. So some of those, just the takeaway of the tools is invaluable. So look, on behalf of the university, Sheffic, on behalf of the students and the faculty and the staff, I just wanted to say thanks for your time and insights. And I'll package up some notes around this, and I'll share it. If the students give me about 24 to 48 hours, I'll package up some of the links, and I'll reach out to some of these platforms, see if we can get some licenses as a suite of tools that they might want to engage with. But again, thank you, and thank you to all the students that passed the questions through. And also, before we go, just everyone have a safe and happy Easter, and we'll see you guys into next week. Anna and Nikki, did you want to add anything?
No, I've just told everyone they can take themselves off mute and give them a round of applause if they'd like.
Yes, well, let's do that.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a safe
Thank you.
Easter.
Thank you so much.
I think that was a standing ovation, Sheffic.
Basically an encore.
Thanks, guys. Well done, Sheffic. Really appreciate it. It was awesome.
Thanks, everyone. It was lovely to meet you, and all the best.
Yeah, good on you
Lovely
guys.
to meet you. See ya.
Bye.